Hello there. Tonight, we walk into the smallest country in the world and treat it not as a mystery to be solved, but as a ledger to be read slowly. The bells have already counted the hour, the piazza has exhaled its last visitors, and the lights inside the walls have settled into a hush that suits paper, ink, and careful hands. We will move at the pace of footsteps on marble, pausing at desks where numbers were once written in neat columns, passing cabinets where donations slept in velvet bags, and stopping at chapels where candles burned because someone, somewhere, paid for wax and wick. No drama is required, only a long, even look at how money, over centuries, taught stone to rise and choirs to sing. We will begin with gifts and promises, coins left at altars, rents from old fields, tithes counted by stewards who knew the seasons by the weight of the baskets they lifted. We will listen to how indulgences were priced and printed, not to argue, only to hear how a paper could carry forgiveness on one side and funds for a building site on the other. When we come to St. Peter's, we will not crane our necks. We will trace the cost beneath the ceiling, quarrying and transport, scaffolds and lime, wages that bought bread for masons and time for artists whose paint still breathes. Every fresco has an invoice. Every note of music had to find a payer before it could float into the nave. Later, we will let a clerk open a drawer and show us the quiet machinery behind devotion. The sealed pouch, the tally stick, a page where yesterday's figures meet today's in clean addition. We will visit the rooms where funds were guarded, shifted, lent, and sometimes lost. We will hear, in a voice that never rises, the names of bankers and the years when the ledger lines wavered. There will be talk of a bank that preferred shadows to announcements, of audits that arrived like winter, and of reforms that moved forward one careful paragraph at a time. We will not hurry that part. Even suspicion, when told gently, can become a lullaby of dates and amounts and signatures that repeat until the mind loosens its grip. And because a place this old keeps its memory in paper, we will stand in a corridor where the air smells of vellum and dust that has learned good manners. There, archivists untie cords and lay out letters that speak in the slow grammar of centuries, receipts, inventories, agreements that kept lamps burning and doors repaired. If we meet controversy, we will walk around it as one walks around a fountain after dark, noticing the shape, noticing the sound, letting it stay where it is. Our task is simpler: to notice how money moves like water through a city of stone, how it enters, how it is guided, and how it leaves, so that tomorrow the bells can ring again. So lie back and let the pace of old bookkeeping set the rhythm of your breath. In through the nose, out a little longer than it came. The night is steady. The columns are patient. We will follow the trail of coins and contracts with soft steps, and by the time the last page turns, the only accounting that matters will be the one your body makes with sleep. The story begins at a wooden alms chest and a stone altar. A pilgrim sets down a small coin that still carries the cool of the morning. A nun leaves a twist of wax for candles. A farmer from miles away folds a pouch with a little flour, a little oil, and a promise. Priests gather such gifts at days and with practiced hands. They sort them on a table that smells of ink and beeswax, turning copper in small heaps, stacking silver by weight rather than shine, setting aside cloth and wheat and tallow to be notched into a list. Nothing is hurried. Figures are spoken aloud, the way prayers are spoken aloud, so the room itself can learn the number. A cord ties each day's offering. A seal of soft wax closes the knot. The bundle sleeps in a cupboard whose key lives on a ring that never leaves the sacristan's belt. This is wealth at the scale of footsteps, gathered in the ordinary weather of devotion. Centuries teach a larger rhythm. Gifts at altars become regular tithes, a tenth in coin or kind that moves from parish to bishop, and from bishop, by custom and by letter, toward Rome. Old estates begin to render rents, not in favor alone, but by contract, fields paying in grain at harvest, vineyards paying in wine at vintage. Princes and guilds pledge tributes to honor a coronation or to steady a treaty. Confraternities send purses after a successful fair. From some realms comes Peter's pence, a thin stream that thickens at certain feasts and travels by ship in sealed chests, each chest bearing 3 locks, so 3 men must agree before it opens. Messengers carry ledgers wrapped in leather against rain. At the journeys and a clerk from the apostolic camera, the papal treasury, breaks the seals, weighs the coin, writes the amount in a careful hand, and notes the road by which the money came. The Camerlengo, steward of these flows, looks not for grandeur but for regularity. A sum expected in spring has arrived in spring. A chest promised at Michaelmas has come within the octave. A gift described as wax has not turned into promises alone. A quiet craft grows around the coin itself. Gold florins, ducats, and silver gros tournois arrive together like cousins who do not share a language. Money, changers sit with a counting board, a grid of lines and a bag of jettons, and turn mixed coins into a number that can be written. Roman numerals fill the page in columns that never race each other. Iron gall ink darkens from brown to near black as it dries. Red headings mark what entered and what left so the eye can rest as it reads. A scale tells the truth about wear. A touchstone refuses to flatter a gilt surface. A small file scrapes a suspect edge and shows whether the metal is an honest alloy or a story. When many small coppers would weary a purse, a clerk notes a conversion to fewer silvers, the margin recording the rate, so no one must consult memory at the end of a long day. This is not the roar of markets. It is the domestication of money, teaching it to live by rules in rooms built for silence. Pilgrimage adds its own seasons to the ledger. On ordinary weeks, a steady trickle. Candles purchased one at a time, alms left at side chapels, offerings for a mass to be said by name. In Jubilee years, the trickle becomes a river that still moves quietly. More feet on the stones, more coins in the chests, more candles to be weighed, more names written in tidy lists. Relics draw lines that do not jostle. Confessionals collect whispers and small gifts. Hostels keep accounts for beds and bread, then send a portion onward by agreement. Chests with 3 locks stand at crossroads inside the basilica, so no single hand can open them. 3 key holders meet at dusk, count aloud, and sign a page that is folded and tied like a parcel so figures will not wander on the walk to the treasury. Reputation is a kind of currency here. The impression that the house remembers, that it writes, that it balances, that it can show a number again tomorrow, and it will match the number shown today. Land and law give the balance its backbone. Within the papal states, roads and bridges carry tolls. Salt moves under a gabella that is mild in one place and firm in another. Customs officers at small ports write tidy receipts for bales and barrels. Quarries and forests are leased, not sold. Farmers sign for fields with terms that run longer than a single life. Millers pay in coin after counting the sacks. From far dioceses, annates, the first fruits of a new benefice, arrive with the bishop's seal. From chancery tables come fees for bulls, dispensations, and confirmations, each parchment paying for the time of the hand that wrote it and for the lead that holds the hanging seal. None of this is secret by nature. It is procedural. A clerk tallies what the road collects. Another records what the chancery draws. A third notes what the steward spends on plaster, oil, bread, wax, rope, pigment, timber, and wages for men whose names fit neatly in the margin beside the weeks they worked. In every generation, 100 small lives keep the large machine from growing noisy. A porter learns the weight of a full leather bag without looking. A scribe repairs a torn folio with paste and patience, and then forgets that it was ever torn. A boy stands on a stool to turn keys in a chest, while 2 elders read the numbers back and forth until both voices agree. A steward walks the cloister at dusk with a list folded in his sleeve and pauses at a door just long enough to hear whether the kitchen has bought wax too dear this week. From these habits comes the kind of wealth that does not glitter, candles that light when asked, steps that do not crumble under pilgrims, roofs that reject a storm, singers who find their notes in the evening because someone thought to pay them in the morning. Stone rises because many small coins remembered how to arrive on time. By the time the lamps are trimmed, the day's bundle sits with yesterday's and last week's, and the cupboards would hold the faint warmth of numbers that will still make sense in a year. Tomorrow the sums will grow larger, the projects more visible, and the methods more inventive. For now the lesson is simple enough to sleep on. Money came in by lanes and lanes. It was counted where walking slows, and it left as wages, wax, and work that kept the city of chapels and papers exactly what it said it was. In the next hour, we will follow how funding faith with gold built a basilica that seems to float, and how every arch and every brushstroke can be read as a line in a ledger that did not need to raise its voice. The ledger opens to a page headed not with trumpets, but with a place. The old basilica at the Vatican Hill, tired by centuries, and the new work that must rise where bones and memory already sleep. A candle stands near the margin and turns the vellum warm. Iron gall ink moves across the line with the steadiness of someone who has written figures all his life. The quill pauses, lifts, returns. On the table sit a balance scale holding florins against ducats, a counting board with neat rows for jettons, a small bag of coins that still remember many pockets, and a wax seal cooling on its cord. Outside, stones imagine themselves as walls. Inside, numbers consider how to become scaffolds, cranes, rope, pigment, and wages. Nothing hurries. In soft chiaroscuro the page fills with what comes in and what must go out, a quiet architecture that will exist long before arches meet. The first costs are not marble at all. They are finding and moving. Quarrymen make a list of travertine to be cut from Tivoli, carters of wagons and oxen, bargemen of barges that will ride the Tiber like patient beetles. Lime must be burned for mortar. Timber must be purchased for centering arches and for the ribs of tall scaffold towers. A foreman writes how much rope is needed to tie the world into a shape that will hold until stone learns to behave. Each sum sits as a thin line on the vellum page, sepia, low contrast. Yet each line contains a day's honest labor, a hillman's shout, a wheel's slow complaint, the slap of river water against a hull. In a copperplate hand, the clerk writes paid, and the word is as important as any plan. Soon the page begins to carry the names of men who draw buildings with a single line. A master of ground plans who asks for survey rods and chalk. A master of elevations who requires plumb bobs and long cords. A master of cranes who orders a tread wheel, oak for spokes, iron for pins, and the wages of two calm men who will walk inside the wheel as steadily as clocks. The ledger does not praise, it itemizes. It notes the price of nails measured by weight, the cost of lead sheets for roofing, the rent for a yard where stone can be dressed and left to season, the purchase of a second counting board because the first one cannot keep up with all the small conversions that a day's mixed coin requires. In the margin, a figure that looks modest becomes a month of bread for masons, a slightly larger one, a season of bread, a single bold number, the winter that keeps a workshop alive when frost prefers arguments to progress. If you could stand, still and unremarked, in the Fabrica's office, the workshop of the Basilica's administration, you would see how money becomes a sort of traffic that never blocks itself. A wooden chest with 3 locks sits under the steward's table, so no one hand is ever tempted. Keys live on different rings, touch different belts. When the chest opens, 3 heads bend, 3 voices count, 3 seals appear in the bottom corner of the page and cool there. Parchment bundles tied with red cord migrate to archive shelves in dim light. An inkwell grows a small wreath of dried black at its lip. The balance scale tilts, rights itself, tilts again. A boy brings a tray of sand to dry the fresh ink, then carries away empty cups. Someone folds yesterday's receipt for rope and slips it into a folio labeled in a clear, thin hand that prefers order to ornament. The whole room is a murmur, numbers spoken, sandals on stone, the hush of pages turned. All of it is headed, gently and without flourish, toward the dome. Not at once, not even soon, but toward the great circle that will hover over the tomb and teach sound to travel as if it were drawn on a compass. To prepare for what cannot yet be seen, the ledger pays for mock-ups in wood, for experiments with mortar recipes, for a trial arch that stands for a month and then is taken down so that its behavior can be read like a sentence. A note authorizes pigments for a modest fresco in a side chapel, because workers who live by light deserve to work in it. And the next line purchases oil for lamps so knights can listen to stone settling without fear. The basilica grows first as entries, small coins that arrived as alms, larger purses from princes or guilds, a tithe delivered on time and acknowledged with a signature that leans slightly to the right. The ledger shows that faith has weight, and that weight must be lifted with timber, iron, rope, food, and the patient balance of sums. When we close the page for the evening, the candle makes the vellum look like warm bread. The wax seal holds its neat impression. The counting board is cleared of jettons and covered with a cloth. The city outside knows only that hammers have worked and then fallen silent. The river knows only that barges have passed and then drifted in their moorings. Here, in the quiet room, the next line waits for tomorrow's ink. In time, new streams will be sought to keep the arithmetic honest and the stones moving. Printed papers that promise spiritual goods and send coin across borders. We will walk to that table next, the one where indulgences are described, priced, and summed, calmly, without heat, reading the figures as figures and letting the rest wait for sleep. In a small room that used to smell of candles and now smells of ink, a pressman sets a sheet of rag paper against a fermi of metal type. He works without hurry. Ink is dabbed with leather ink balls. The screw descends, wood creaks, and the sheet lifts with a crisp rectangle of words bordered by a modest woodcut of crossed keys. The headline is red, rubric painted by hand with a thin brush, while the body is a sober black that will darken as iron gall ink dries. Along the lines are blanks for a name, a parish, a date, the signature of a commissary, and the place where a seal will rest when wax cools. Stacked nearby are quires of paper wrapped in twine, a counting board with jettons, a small balance scale for florins and ducats, and a box of tiny type that returns to its cases the way birds return to a roof. Copperplate charts hang on the wall. Fees to be suggested, not demanded. Instructions about the chest with 3 locks. Notes on how to fold the finished indulgence so the seal will not crack. The press turns at a pace friendly to sleep. Sheet, ink, pressure, lift, while a clerk at the side table writes numbers in a ledger whose margins remember yesterday. What the sheet offers is not forgiveness of sin. Confession and absolution belong to another room, but a remission of the temporal penalties that the old manuals say remain after sin is forgiven. A trimming of the tail of fault drags behind it. The theology is older than the press and quieter than its critics. Prayers said, fasts kept, alms given, pilgrimages walked. All these works can be ordered into a pattern with a paper that says the church will count them as done through the treasury of merit it believes has been entrusted to it. The document reads like a receipt with promises on both sides. A paragraph in red notes conditions, a good confession, a heart not playing its sorrow, a prayer for the Pope's intentions. Below, the space for a name waits, then the line for a sign and the ring for wax. The clerk speaks the details aloud as he writes so the room can agree with him. The parish, the date, the amount given, the seal applied, the chest consulted. Outside, a pilgrim buys a candle. Inside, The paper accepts a seal that cools with the smell of beeswax and dyes the ribbon dark. From time to time, the press rests, and a different rhythm takes its place. A preacher arrives from the road with a banner showing the keys and the tiara, sets a table in the market under a canvas awning, and begins in a voice that knows how to be urgent without being loud. There is a chest with 3 locks. There is a list of suggested alms that scales itself by means. A sum for a guild master, a smaller one for a trader, a smaller still for a widow, and a note that the poor may be poor without shame. A choir boy holds a basket of small printed slips. A scribe fills names with a pen that squeaks on the fibers. Coins arrive in leather pouches and are counted on a board striped with lines. Jettons walk and pause. The clerk wipes the scales pan with a cloth so dust does not choose for him. In some towns, a famous orator draws a crowd large enough to make the day feel like a fair. In others, a quiet friar reads from a prepared sheet and then listens. The pattern holds: a sermon about mercy, a table with papers, a chest, a ledger, a seal cooling on its ribbon. If someone later remembers a name like Tetzel, it will be as one name among many along a road that lasted years. Money moves with the papers and does not lose its honesty by traveling. A portion stays to repair a roof or to buy bread for a hospital. A portion goes forward by letter of exchange, written by a banker whose ink knows many cities. Agents of firms such as Fugger weigh the coins, note the rate, and agree to pay a sum in Rome when proof of deposit arrives from the town square far away. On certain days, the Fabrica's office opens a pouch that has crossed as many hands as a story and finds within it a banker's promise and a merchant's signature. The ledger enters the number in a careful hand. The steward authorizes wages. The press that printed indulgences turns, on other days, to print a hymn sheet, a feast notice, a page of a confessor's manual. In the press room, type returns to cases. EMN split into their boxes, long S and short S separated by habit, while the woodcut of the keys dries on a hook. The counting board is covered with a cloth. The balance scale rests with its needle centered. A bundle of finished documents lies with a red cord around it, and a note in a thin copperplate hand that says where they will go tomorrow. A reaction gathers slowly, like weather. Bishops issue memoranda that remind preachers to speak of sorrow before speaking of sums. Lists are updated to make clarity a kind of mercy. Confessors are instructed to ask about intention, not price. Then, in a small university town, a friar hammers thoughts to a door, and the press that does not sleep finds that it can multiply arguments as easily as it multiplied forms. A single sheet of theses, tight lines, small margins, crosses rivers as briskly as any indulgence letter did. Pamphlets answer pamphlets. In some places, a seal is warmed for a reply. In others, a drawer is opened to show the old rules and their purpose. The market still wakes on feast days. The press still prints receipts and hymn sheets. The chest still waits for 3 keys. Only the air has changed by a degree you can feel on the back of the hand. If you lay your head down near the ledger, you can hear both rhythms, the old one of paper, ink, seal, and the new one of paper, ink, opinion, and neither rhythm is hurried. The basilica still needs stone, the poor still need bread, and the book that records entries and exits keeps adding lines that look the same no matter what they are about. By evening, the table is clean again. A last indulgence is folded along its creases and slipped into a sleeve. The wax sticks go back into the drawer. The quill's nib is trimmed and left to dry. The sand used to set ink is brushed into a small dish with a lip that pours neatly. The pressman covers the fermi with oiled paper, touches a hand to the screw to be sure it is at rest, and sets the room in order so morning will find it honest. Tomorrow the ledger will join this money to the long business of building, lime, timber, rope, wages, and the narrative will widen to include popes who acted like princes and artists who asked for colors that cost what colors have always cost. But for tonight, the page we hold is only this: a printed indulgence with a name in black, a rubric in red, a seal that cooled without complaint, and a number that found its proper column. It is enough, for sleep, to know the sequence: press, pin, seal, chest, ledger, and then, as always, stone learning how to rise. Daylight in Rome grows a little more theatrical in this century, but the bookkeeping keeps its voice. Popes begin to act like princes because the city asks to be mended and made splendid at once, and the only tools that can do both are patronage and payroll. In the apostolic palace, a steward lays out a long table. Vellum folios, iron gall ink that dries to a sober black, a balance scale for florins and ducats, a counting board striped for jetons, a small chest with 3 locks tucked under his knee. Names that will one day be painted on walls: Julius, Leo, Medici, appear here first as signatures at the foot of warrants. A line authorizes scaffolds for frescoes in the papal apartments. Another buys lime and sand for a corridor that will keep rain off manuscripts. Another hires 2 stonecutters for a stair where cardinals will climb with dry hems. The room smells of wax and dust and new timber. Outside, courtyards ring with the slow clink of chisels. Inside, the apostolic camera adds 2 columns and a sum, then breathes. Artists arrive the way rivers arrive, individually, then all at once. In one folio, the steward records Raphael's rooms. Pigments charged to the Fabrica and patient lists, azurite by the pound, vermilion by the ounce, lead white by the sack, gold leaf noted by the book with a margin remark about lost to drafts. Stretchers for canvas, canvas for studies, charcoal, goose quills cut to different widths, a boy hired to grind colors in oil until the paste answers like butter. In another folio, a different hand writes payments to Michelangelo not for stone alone, but for ropes, gin poles, tread wheel, iron cramps, wedges, and the wages of men who walk the wheel as steadily as clocks. Each voucher ends in the same copperplate column: paid, a seal, sand to set the ink. Nothing in the margin claims genius. The ledger knows only materials and time, both expensive, both honest. Princes must keep order as well as beauty, and the order has a uniform. On a counter near a window, a quartermaster spreads a list for the Swiss Guard: wool broadcloth in Vatican red and blue, linen for shirts, leather for belts, thread, needles, thimbles, boot soles, harness oil, spearheads shaped at a city forge that issues tidy receipts. Tailors are paid by garment, armorers by piece. A cobbler's bill is noted with a small correction for nails that loosened in ring. Across the page, another hand tallies kitchen needs for the papal household: bread by the modius, beef by the quarter, fish by the creel, herbs in tied bundles, candles by weight, olive oil by amphora, salt by the sack with a note "Gabella paid" at the gate. The court looks grand in frescoes. The ledger remembers it as cloth, iron, wax, salt, labor, and the quiet mathematics that keeps a tableable and a guard dry. War, when it comes, enters the books without trumpet or margin ornament. A scribe in a side room copies contracts with condottieri, careful about dates, clearer about penalties. There are advances for pikes and powder, wagons and mules, farriers, surgeons, carpenters, smiths, bridge makers, boatmen, each a line that looks like any other until you imagine the sound it purchases. Tithes and annates are steered toward this purse for a season. Bankers write letters of exchange so coin can appear at a frontier, while the city keeps its metal for wages at home. The ledger does not argue policy. It measures the cost of intention: timber that is not scaffold but palisade, iron that is not cramp but nail, bread that travels. When the season turns and the quarrel cools, the same clerk notes repairs to a city gate and the purchase of new tiles where fire taught a roof to leak. The handwriting is the same whether it writes fresco or fairy. Not all splendor stands on walls. Cabinets fill with small works that also need entries. silver for chalices, gold thread for copes, vellum for choir books, a fee for a printer to cast a new music type so notes can sit on lines with more grace and less complaint. A mint master brings patterns for medals, popes in profile with Latin around the rim, and the cost of dies is written once for the steel and again for the artisan. The librarian submits a modest list: bindings in calf and pigskin, clasps in brass, paste made from flour and water and a pinch of salt, a repair to the window that lets in too much damp in winter. In the archive corridor, bundles tied with red cord multiply like careful thoughts. A thin hand writes spine labels in the calm that does not require praise: receipts, pigments, wages, wheel, cloth, guard, mint, music, bindings. Because men are men, the court also has nephews and favorites and families with names that look familiar when written beside benefices. The books do not blush. They write stipends and household grants and the purchase of a small palazzo for offices that, conveniently, also house a brother or a cousin. From time to time, a reforming pope orders an audit. Then, for a few months, numbers are read aloud in larger rooms, ediles of finance, by other names, ask questions, a few pensions are trimmed, a few offices are folded into others, the ledger receives a new column, reduced. None of it changes the main fact. The city is being rebuilt and redecorated, not by miracles, but by flows, tithes, rents, fees, prints, loans that pass through ink before they pass through hands. If you stand at a window of the palace just before Vespers, you can see how the century explains itself. In one direction, cranes and treadwheels turn above St. Peter's. In another, smoke from kilns stains the evening a little brown. Down in a courtyard, 3 guards adjust their cuffs. Across a corridor, a cook carries a basket of herbs. In a studio, a boy wipes azurite from a stone with a cloth that will be blue forever. In a side chapel, a mason strikes a chisel 2 more times, then stops because the light is wrong for edges. Somewhere between those acts, a clerk closes a folio, presses a seal, and sets it to dry with a pinch of sand. If later ages call these popes princes, the ledger shows what princeship costs when built of stone and salaries rather than of rumors. Pigments, ropes, wheels, iron pins, wool, wine, wax, bread, rent, interest, each line a step toward a city that looks inevitable only after you have paid for it. By night, the palaces grow quiet. The counting boards are covered, and the 3 keys that keep the chest honest travel to 3 different belts. In the morning, the sums will continue. More fresco, more roof, more rope, sometimes more soldier, often more song. For now, it is enough to let the mind take on the rhythm of these entries. Commission, deliver, pay, hire, feed, pay, sign, seal, store. Next, we will open the book with a darker binding, the one that keeps the story of bankers and their shadows, when secrecy and trust tried to live in the same room and taught Rome the price of hidden ledgers. The banker's desk looks like any other wooden table until you notice how much stillness is required to make numbers travel. In 1 century, it is candlelit, vellum folios, iron gall ink, a counting board striped for jettons, a balance scale that knows the weight of florins and ducats by heart. In another, it is lamplit, cloth-bound ledgers ruled in red and black for double entry, a fountain pen that writes debtor on the left and creditor on the right, a rubber stamp that leaves the day's date in a tidy square. The work is the same in both lights, turning gifts and fees and rents into wages, stone, wax, bread, rope, pigment, interest, and alms without letting the stream grow cloudy. Medieval Rome learns to move coin without moving coin through the letter of exchange. A banker in Augsburg accepts money and writes a promise. A partner in Rome pays the equivalent after glancing at a rate that changes as softly as weather. The clerk writes the city of origin, the sum, the fee, and the name of the house that carried the promise across mountains. He sands the ink, folds the paper once, and slips it into a folio marked Cambi. Exchanges. Money has learned to behave like letters. It travels faster when it travels as agreement. For a long time, the apostolic camera, the papal treasury, relies on families whose names sound like streets, each house with its bench in a market and its long memory. A steward brings in a chest with 3 locks, not because he doubts the banker, but because good habits are cheaper than apologies. The banker's man lays out a sheet ruled in columns, writes in a copperplate hand that is calm even when rain is loud on the awning, and explains the movement. Here arrives the annates from a far diocese. Here departs the wage of masons at the basilica. Here the fee to a printer for him sheets. Here a remittance to a hospital whose roof learned to leak. The ledger does not praise the road for its patience or the messenger for his horses. It marks value in, value out, balances the page at dusk, and ties a thong around the day so it will not unwind in the night. Pilgrimage seasons swell the entries. Quiet months shrink them. Interest is not a story, but a neat percentage written where red ink expects it. The system grows a spine of routine. Reconcile at vesper light. Lock, seal, store, repeat. The miracle, if there is one, is literacy in arithmetic. Time narrows. The papal states fall away, and a small country remains within walls. After a treaty restores a patrimony in modern notes and bonds, new rooms are fitted for finance without a frontier, brass lamps with green shades, blotters that remember yesterday's figures, telephones that ring softly, a telex whose thin paper stutters out lines that sound like rain. Here lives the institute formed to safeguard and administer funds intended for works of religion and charity. Its purpose written in statutes that prefer nouns to adjectives. Monasteries and dioceses open accounts. Congregations send instructions from far coasts. A mission writes to say that a school roof must be mended before the rains. Files are labeled by number more often than by name because privacy is the cheapest form of security the church knows how to grant. A supervisory commission reads reports. An auditor adds footnotes where the arithmetic becomes too pleased with itself. The vault door hums shut with a tenderness that would surprise anyone who expected a clang. Most days are unremarkable. Convert this gift into a safer currency. Place that legacy into short bonds that sleep through winter. Wire a stipend. Receive a remittance. Balance at close. Secrecy and trust try to share the same chair, and the chair sometimes wobbles. The Institute learns the old banker's lesson again. A good wall keeps in as much as it keeps out. Names are withheld because donors ask for silence. Numbers are proved because charity asks for proof. A parish in one country sends small sums monthly for another parish it will never see. A convent forwards the proceeds of a field. A hospital requests help with a machine that listens to the heart. A bishop asks that his stipend be split in 5 to ease a poor quarter quietly. The files accumulate felt-tipped notes in the margins, received, forwarded, acknowledged, while the big ledger holds its tone, date, description, amount, balance. In these unglamorous lines, the most faithful work occurs. Behind the desk, a clerk keeps 2 lists in mind. What can be explained in 10 words to a mother superior with a crackling line, and what must be set out fully for men who audit in patient paragraphs. The Institute dislikes headlines for the same reason the old treasurers did. Paper that travels quickly often forgets how to be careful. There have been seasons when shadows lengthen. A partner house collapses, a promise issued elsewhere is not kept, an account that should have been closed stays open too long. The city talks. A pamphlet finds an audience. But in this chapter, we do not chase the rumors. We notice the counterweights that appear when rooms learn from discomfort. Clearer statutes, narrower doors between client and clerk, more frequent reconciliations, an insistence that a page must balance in 2 directions, to the coin that entered and to the purpose it reached. The Institute cannot be a cathedral. but it can borrow a cathedral's habit of regular care. Sweep daily, mend cracks before winter, oil hinges so they never learn how to shout. At close of business, the green lamps are dimmed, the telex sleeps, the last wire confirmation sits under a paperweight with a little cross in its brass. 3 signatures in blue ink chase a line to its right margin and stop exactly at the column. If you stand, very quietly, at the threshold as the door is locked, you can almost hear how the centuries rhyme. Letters of exchange once crossed mountains on mules. Now instructions cross oceans along wires. Both require a hand at one end that writes well and a hand at the other that reads carefully. In both rooms, the most dangerous thing is not wickedness, but imprecision. So the habit remains. Reconcile, annotate, initial, date, seal. Money is not asked to be holy. It is asked to be accounted for, because only accounted money can become wages and wax and bread and roofs and song in the places that asked for help. Tomorrow the clerk will sharpen a pencil, line up columns that remember yesterday, and call down a balance that hears its own name. And in the long corridor that connects old cupboards with new vaults, the air will smell faintly of paper and ink, the soft scent of a city that prays with candles and pays with numbers, and sleeps best when both are in order. The room does not change much. Green-shaded lamps, cloth-bound ledgers, a telex that sounds like soft rain. What changes is the volume outside. Newspapers begin to speak in headlines, and the habit of privacy that once felt like courtesy begins to read, to some, like a closed door at the end of a public hallway. After wars that shuffled borders and currencies, deposits arrive not only as parish stipends and legacies, but also as complex instructions from foundations, holding companies, and far banks that speak many languages at once. Clerks write what they have always written: date, description, amount, balance. Only now the description sometimes needs a second line, and the balance is asked to explain itself to men who do not pray in these buildings, but do red numbers for a living. The vault hums, the blotter drinks its ink, the phone on the corner desk rings and is answered with a surname and calm voice. By evening the page still balances. In the morning, the city begins to ask how. The questions arrive as files with ribbon ties. A partner institution fails far away. A promise written elsewhere is not kept. An offshore company no one has ever met turns out to be a room with a brass plate and a lawyer for a landlord. Money that was meant to be safeguarded seems to have been guaranteed, or at least underwritten by words that looked modest until they were read by a judge. Clerks who have never left Rome learn the names of bridges in other cities, streets in other countries, and banks that now exist mostly as paper. The rhythm inside stays careful. Reconcile, annotate, initial, date. But beyond the walls, cameras clatter, and typed statements are read as if they were verdicts. In ledgers that would rather not be famous, new hands write in red. Provision, impairment, settlement. And in the margins, in pencil, a single word the old treasurers rarely needed: explain. There are seasons when the air feels colder by a degree. A banker from a private house dies under a bridge, and the city talks for years. Inquests open, close, open again. Courts convene and recess. Books are seized. Boxes are opened. Ribbons are untied. Some accusations prove brittle, others hold. The institute that preferred not to be named finds itself on the front page with its initials in bold type, and a phrase that once sounded reassuring, for works of religion and charity, is read now as a promise to be demonstrated in arithmetic. Committees are seated. Auditors with neat hair and thick spectacles arrive with lists. Account numbers are asked to shake hands with names. Doors between desk and client grow narrower. The phrase "closed due to inactivity" appears more often. Men who had once signed with a flourish begin to sign with a smaller hand. Seals are pressed a little harder into wax. Some controversies reach back to the shadows of wartime and ask whether custody had always been matched by clarity. Did deposits belonging to institutions that no longer exist travel forward into accounts that do? And if so, did those accounts remember their origins? Lawyers phrase the questions with more commas. Archivists phrase the answers with more dates. Boxes labeled with years are brought up from cool rooms. Receipts are placed under light. Where a line is missing, a clerk writes lacuna in the margin and finds the next place the trail resumes. This is not a pulp story. It is a long conversation between paper and patience. Some matters resolve with checks written and apologies typed. Some are contested until time itself becomes part of the settlement. The public seldom reads the footnotes. Inside, the footnotes are where breathing returns to normal. Reform, when it comes, is not trumpets but procedures. New statutes write, infirmer nouns, who may open what? Screening that used to be a handshake becomes due diligence typed in black. Relationships that depended on a surname now require documentation that would bore a saint. External auditors sign reports whose appendices outnumber their pages. Supervisory bodies meet not annually, but quarterly. Summaries are published in a prose so dry it could keep graying. Dormant accounts are closed. Beneficial owners are recorded. Transfers that once crossed borders on a nod now wait for 2 signatures and a wire confirmation that prints itself into a folder. None of this makes a photograph worth printing. All of it makes a room worth trusting again, slowly, one practice at a time. The biggest change is not a headline, but a habit. The page must balance in 2 directions, back to origin, forward to purpose. If you listen at day's end, what you hear is familiar: a stamp's soft kiss, a file drawer closing, shoes passing in the corridor to evening prayer. The scandal years have not taught the ledgers to shout. They have taught them to answer. The old rule, money is not asked to be holy, only to be accounted for, returns with sharper edges and better lamps. Outside, opinion continues, as it will. Inside, the sequence resumes: reconcile, annotate, initial, date, seal. Tomorrow the bank of green lamps will light. The phones will ring with calmer voices, and the institute that learned how much silence costs will practice a quieter art, letting the numbers speak before anyone else has to. Morning in the finance rooms now begins with checklists instead of charm. The green lamps glow, the blinds are half, drawn against a bright courtyard, and a tray of slim reports waits beside a rubber stamp that leaves the date in a neat rectangle. On the wall, a calendar is more closing dates than feast days. Clerks open browsers that look nothing like the old ledgers and yet behave exactly like them. Columns in sober black, headings in red, totals that must agree. A kettle clicks somewhere, paper warms under a printer's rollers, and the day arranges itself into procedures: reconcile, annotate, initial, save, backup, file. The tone is not secrecy, it is containment. Numbers are encouraged to stay where they belong, to explain themselves when asked, to travel only when chaperoned by 2 signatures and a wire confirmation that prints to a folder before it enters a vault of memory. The rhythm is gentle, and that gentleness is deliberate. Even the keys on the keyboard are touched in a way that would not wake a sleeping room. Oversight has grown a paper garden of its own. Where once a ledger and a seal could persuade most questions to rest, there are now audits that arrive quarterly, policies that thicken like hedges, risk matrices whose squares are colored with the kind of care that used to be reserved for illuminated capitals. A committee gathers in a room with quiet glass and water glasses. The chair reads a paragraph that sounds like a prayer for the well-ordered. Someone takes minutes that will later be typeset into tidy pages with margins wide enough to hold a future note. In another building, examiners from a body whose name hardly matters lay out their on-site findings. Due diligence files complete, account activity consistent with stated purpose, exceptions noted, remediation timelines accepted. No trumpet follows. A stamp meets a page. A binder closes with the small consonant of a metal ring. The virtue here is not drama, but repeatability. The same tasks done the same way until the way itself becomes a kind of assurance. Privacy and transparency are taught to shake hands instead of wrestle. A donor in a distant city asks that her name remain in a sealed envelope. The sealed envelope now lives in a drawer that logs every time it opens. A mission hospital requests help with a machine that listens to hearts. The funds move across borders by a path that writes a sentence at every crossing. Purpose, beneficiary, amount, date. Accounts that once carried charming names now carry numbers that behave like door plaques. Access is granted, logged, reviewed, reduced. Files know their beneficial owners. Transfers learn to wait for source of funds notes. The word suspicious no longer implies scandal. Only the obligation to think twice and write once. No one in these rooms wants to be famous. The goal is for a day's work to be provable without being photogenic, to be able to show a page and say, here is what arrived, here is where it went, here is the signature of the purpose that received it, and here are the initials of the person who checked both ends. The shadows have not left, they have been measured. There are still questions that like to stand at the edge of the light. Old accounts that never learned how to close. Legacies with conditions written in a hand whose owner has long since gone to the quieter archive. Relationships that were tidy when they began and complicated when they ripened. For these, the modern habit is a timeline drawn without adjectives. Opened, used, paused, reviewed, amended, either resolved or retired. Where paper is missing, the margin says lacuna. Where intent is unclear, the note says seek clarification. Where use diverges from promise, the remedy is return, redirect, report. The public is sometimes impatient with such patience. Headlines prefer verbs that run. But inside the walls the verbs are mostly tend, balance, explain. The table learns to keep two kinds of light. The daylight that shows the surface and the desk lamp that makes footnotes plainly visible, so that neither the thing nor its context needs to be guessed. Reform is not a single document. It is a calendar. This month, the policy on opening files is tightened by one word that will save 2 hours next year. Next month, the reporting template is altered so a column that was always misunderstood now reads with the clarity of a window washed in winter. In summer, the training manual adopts a tone more like a cookbook. Ingredients, order, timing, cautions, so the recipe for a clean transfer can be learned by heart. In autumn, the second signature becomes unavoidable in scenarios that once relied on trust. None of this produces the pleasure of a dome or a fresco. All of it produces the background calm, without which domes and frescoes would have to answer a different kind of question. At dusk, someone sets the printer to sleep, locks a drawer that records its own locking, and places a thin stack of reconciled pages into a file where tomorrow's hand will find them and not. If you listen as the evening bell folds into the corridor, you can hear how the centuries have rhymed themselves into a single sentence. A pilgrim's coin became a tally, became a column, became a dashboard. A chest with 3 locks became a vault that opens with 2 codes and a log. A clerk who read aloud to the room now writes, so that a stranger far away can read without hearing a voice. The purpose has not changed, to escort value from intention to need, with as few opportunities for confusion as patience can remove. When people outside say there are still secrets, they are often thinking of romance instead of privacy with receipts. The rooms inside answer, softly, with paper that shows its lineage and with numbers that behave in company. We will let them do their work. Our next walk will be away from green lamps and toward older light, the long corridor of the archive, where memory keeps its agreements with time, and where shelves hold the receipts of centuries in the quiet that makes sleep easy. The corridor cools by a degree as we step under a shallow arch and into a long, quiet spine of the palace. Air here has been taught to move slowly. It smells faintly of lime wash, vellum, and the powdery hush of iron gall ink dried a century ago. Along the walls, presses and cabinets with copperplate labels, a ladder polished by careful hands, a table with green-shaded lamps that pool light without waking shadows. Bundles lie in even ranks, parchment wraps tied with red cord, the knots pressed flat by time. Some packets are plump with folded bulls whose lead seals, bully, still dangle from silk cords. Others are thin as a letter that had to say one thing only. The name has changed. What was once called the secret archive prefers apostolic now, but the habit is older than names. Receive, list, tie, shelve, retrieve. The drama here is a date written cleanly. An archivist meets us with clean hands, sometimes gloves, often none, and a pencil that has learned to whisper. He writes a reference like a small poem. Fondo, series, busta, fascicolo. Each word a narrowing path toward a box that knows exactly what it holds. A slip is filled. A bell does not ring. A door opens onto cooler air and climate cabinets that hum the quiet music of preservation. A box returns on a cart lined with felt. On the reading table, the lids are set down like lids in a sacristy. Gently, evenly, nothing spun. Rules arrive as comfort rather than scold. Pencil only, one file at a time. Keep folios flat. Turn by edge, not corner. Leave the order as you found it. Under the lamp, vellum shows its warm grain. Paper shows the wire marks of an old mold. Rubrics glow a soft red. The black of old ink has gone almost brown. Between pages, a small slip hums with a number that will not forget where it belongs. You read a ledger of the apostolic camera that lists a year when coins were weighed like prayers. Date in one column, source in the next, amount in the third, and a skinny margin for notes that are never gossip and always useful. Arrived by sea, paid in full, 2 locks opened, rope dear this month. You meet a register of indulgence receipts bound in limp vellum, its lines steady as breath. Parish, name, sum, seal applied, chest consulted. A drawer gives up a chancery fee book for dispensations and confirmations, where the cost of parchment, lead, and scribe are written in so shy a hand you feel invited to lower your eyes. There is nothing occult about the secrecy people once imagined. There is only record-keeping so thorough it has learned not to wave its arms. The archive does not exonerate by flourish, it documents. It does not accuse by tone, it dates. Not every trail is straight. A file opens onto correspondence with bankers whose houses now live only as letterheads. Another folder contains letters of exchange where sums moved like weather between Augsburg and Rome, signed twice, endorsed once, settled with a note in a hand that leans right. A packet tied with a faded ribbon holds receipts for stone and rope for a scaffold that stood one season and then went back into trees. On a folio margin, a scribe has written lacuna where a page tore away before anyone thought to mend it. 2 files later, the missing figure appears, copied into a summary drawn up for someone who needed to see the year at a glance. Now and then a sheet has been canceled, a neat cross in red, a notation that a promise was not kept and a sum was set aside to balance it. The comfort is not that every question is answered. It is that every question is held somewhere it can be asked again without noise. People lean toward the word secret because they like the shape it makes in the mouth, but here the satisfying word is series. A series of inventories that tell how many candles the sacristy bought against winter. A series of annate rolls that mark which benefices paid first fruits and which paid late. A series of receipts for wax and oil that link a city's light to its numbers. Even the rooms of discomfort, the Inquisition's proceedings, the bank inquiries, the audits after a failure, behave themselves on paper. Witness lists, sums impounded, a verdict that spends more words on procedure than on adjectives. The archivist does not raise an eyebrow when you ask for these. He loves all children equally. He brings the file. He points to the finding aid written in calm capitals. He lets the paper make its own weather. Late in the afternoon, the lamps seem warmer though their filaments have not changed. You have learned to turn a folio by its edge without thinking, to lay a paper back exactly where the clip wants it, to slide a packet into its sleeve so the cord's not rests where it was placed by someone who might have been paid a lime-scented coin the day he tied it. On the slip you return, you write the smallest of thank yous because readers do that here. On his log, the archivist writes consulted and the date because archivists do that everywhere. Boxes roll home on felt. Lids meet cabinets with a soft wooden vowel. The corridor accepts its evening. If you had arrived hoping for a revelation with trumpets, you will go away with something rarer, a belief that memory kept in order is better for sleep than any rumor. Tomorrow we can ask the archive for a different shelf, medals and mints, perhaps, or the Swiss Guards cloth accounts. But tonight we will walk back through the cool and let the walls hold their breath. When we reach the stair, the archive leaves us a last courtesy, a notice in 2 languages about pencils, silence, and clean hands. It reads like a small liturgy of care. Outside, Rome rehearses evening, bells, a cart on cobbles, the thin line of swifts across a square. Inside your head, ledgers arrange themselves into the same patient column. Date, entry, exit, balance. The conspiracy, if there is one, is only this: that paper can keep faith with time when people do not hurry it. We will close our eyes on that thought and let the next chapter be shorter. The outro, and then the ambient music that does the archive's work without any paper at all. By evening, the city becomes a ledger you can walk through. A clerk closes a book, and somewhere a lamp is trimmed in a side chapel because today's oil was bought on today's line. A bursar initials a page, and in a hospital across the river, a machine that listens to hearts blinks once, content, because a wire arrived in time to keep a promise. In a conservatory where the air smells faintly of rosin and old varnish, a choir rehearses a psalm on paper copied last week, paid for with a receipt whose ink has just gone from brown to black. The arithmetic is simple and patient. Entry, exit, balance, intention, transfer, use. None of it waves its arms. You notice it only if you stand still and listen for the small sounds money makes when it stops being money. Linen stacked in a laundry, flowers settling in a sack, a hinge that does not squeak because someone bought oil. The old words are still at work under newer lights. Annates and tithes have become grants and stipends. Letters of exchange have become transfers with numbers for names. The chest with 3 locks is now a vault door that opens when 2 codes agree. But the destinations have not learned new habits. A school keeps rain outside because tiles were bought. A pantry keeps hunger outside because deliveries arrived on a schedule that could be reconciled. A residence hall keeps loneliness outside because the electricity for warm corridors was paid before winter grew confident. On a workshop table, wax and wick are counted into boxes that will be candles by morning. At a printer, a ream of staff paper and a small order of hymnals leave a press that has learned, like its ancestor, to behave politely when ink meets rag. In a tailor's room off a quiet hallway, cloth accounts yield 3 new cassocks and a careful repair. The bill sits under a smooth stone until someone signs paid, and the stone gives it back. Some of the best arithmetic is invisible because it is small. A bursar with neat handwriting divides a stipend among 5 envelopes and sends them where the addresses are modest and the stairs are steep. A parish treasurer marks bread for a widow as customary and lets the entry repeat each month until the paper knows the route by heart. A mission writes that a roof has begun to leak along the northern beam. 2 weeks later, a carpenter measures, a roofer climbs. A receipt is folded into a file with a new date, and the leak becomes a sentence that ends in period, not an ellipsis. None of this will ever be framed. It is the kind of care that prefers to be true rather than noticed. In rooms where no one sleeps badly for lack of plaster, ledgers have done their work. Even art, which seems to belong to another register, keeps books like a kitchen. Pigments have invoices. Choirs have payrolls. Organ pipes travel with waybills. A conservator orders glue, parchment, gold leaf, and patience and pays for each with a line that reads an honest number. A rehearsal ends. Someone lays a score on a chair, and the chair leg does not wobble because a carpenter was paid last spring to remake the joint. The Archivio that we walked yesterday receives 2 new boxes today, one for a completed project, one for last month's audit, and they roll into their slots like pieces that always meant to fit. The labels are not poems, they are series and dates. But the mind that prefers calm can find comfort in their order, the way a sleeper finds comfort in breathing that returns without being told. When night gathers in the courtyards, the system that has been rising since morning lowers its voice without losing its shape. Screens go dark, but the balance remains balanced. Drawers close, but the purpose continues. The city rests on decisions that look small up close and large when you let them drift to scale. If questions come tomorrow, as they always do, they will be answered in the same tone, with dates, amounts, signatures, and the slow courtesy of explanation. And if someone asks whether money in such a place can ever be innocent, the rooms answer with their only claim: not innocent, accounted, not perfect, proved, not glamorous, useful. The bells count the hour. The corridor air cools by a degree. We have 1 chapter left, only an outro now, to put the paper away and let the ambient music carry what the ledgers have been carrying all along, a steady line from intention to rest. The day finishes the way good books finish, not with a flourish, but with a line that reaches its margin and stops exactly where it should. In the treasury rooms, the last reconciliations sit paired, entry beside exit, purpose beside proof, while a clerk initials the corner with a hand that does not hurry. The balance agrees with itself in 2 directions, backward to origin and forward to use. The page carries the soft dusting of sand where fresh ink was set, then brushed away. A key turns once. A drawer closes with a well-made sound. Green lamps lower their glow until the tabletops remember only the grain of their wood. Beyond the windows, the courtyard keeps its square of evening, and a bell counts the hour as if it had been counting it forever. Elsewhere, the results of quiet arithmetic rest in their natural places. A chapel holds a steady light because oil was purchased and carried and noted. A pantry keeps order because flour arrived when it should and was stacked where a list said it would be. A sick room breathes more easily because a wire crossed 2 borders and a machine answered. A choir folds printed paper along its staples and leaves the music to sleep on a chair. None of this announces itself, and none of it is small. The city is a map of receipts made visible, tiles that keep rain where rain belongs, hinges that do not remember how to squeak, a corridor that is warm enough to explain kindness without words. In the archive corridor, a cart returns 2 boxes to their shelf. The lids settle, the copperplate labels face outward, the red cords lie flat as if they were drawn with a ruler. A note on the reading desk says consulted and the date. A pencil that stayed quiet all afternoon is set in a dish. The climate cabinets hum like bees that know when to work and when to rest. Secrecy is not the lesson the day offers. Sequences: receive, list, tie, shelve, retrieve, commission, deliver, pay, reconcile, annotate, initial, store. When rooms act in that order, suspicion has fewer places to borrow a chair. When rooms forget, suspicion moves in and begins to redecorate. Tonight, the furniture belongs to the calmer tenant. Even the rumor of scandal loses its appetite in evening light. The files that once required voices to rise now require only footnotes that remember which figure came from which hand on which date. A policy that arrived with adjectives earlier in the year has been copied into the manual and nouns. A procedure that asked for trust alone now asks for trust and a second signature. A form that used to confuse a tired clerk has been redrawn with space enough for the answer people actually give. Reform, seen up close, looks like stationary. Seen at a day's distance, it looks like a building that sleeps without checking the weather. The last acts are practical and kind. Sand is brushed from the blotter into its tin. The stamp is capped. The balance scale is centered so it does not dream badly. The vault door closes and writes the time into a log that will be read in the morning by a different hand. A porter takes a final walk past doors that prefer to be touched once. A sacristan pauses to count the candles that should be counted. A gardener steps into a narrower dark and listens for water in the soil near a wall that keeps its own counsel. In every corner, the same idea finishes its work. Nothing grand. Only the care that lets grandeur exist without explanation. If you are listening in the kind of quiet that notices the difference between silence and rest, you can feel the city reach its balance. Breathing takes the tempo of a ledger that has learned to close well. Slow in, slower out. The lights you cannot see are the ones that matter. The pilot flames that keep a boiler honest. The dots on a device that waits for a morning nurse. The small green eye of a recorder that holds its memory for someone else's sake. Paper sleeps. Numbers keep their shape. Intentions have been escorted to where they were meant to go. The chapter ends the way all good accounts end, with nothing owed and nothing left to invent. When the screen darkens, let it be the book's back cover. The rest of the night can carry the same line, steady, even, proved, until it turns into sleep.